Hello, bookworms. Welcome to The Best Book Ever, the podcast where we talk about your favorite books. I'm your host, Julie Strauss, and I am extra excited about today's guest because she owns a bookstore. Jhoanna Belfer is the founder and owner of Bel Canto Books, an independent bookstore in Long Beach, California. A Filipina-American poet and former hospitality executive, Jhoanna started hosting pop-up book events in 2018 as a way of connecting her business experience with her lifelong love of reading. She currently serves on the American Booksellers Association's Bookseller Advisory Council and is a founding member of the Burning Issues Book Club. I had so much fun talking to Jhoanna about the bookstore life that all of us readers secretly dream about, how she chose the name for her bookstore, and why The Body Papers by Grace Talusan is the best book ever. For more information on how to support this podcast, check out my Patreon. For about the cost of a latte, you can have access to all sorts of extra goodies. Every week, you'll get exclusive interview clips with my guests that are only available to patrons. I also send out advance notice of the books we discuss, curated reading lists, my monthly reading wrap-ups, including the good, the bad, and the DNFs, and essays about the reading life. Go to patreon.com, that's patreon.com/bestbookever to learn more about how you can help me keep the candles burning over here in my reading cave. Now, back to the show. Hi, Jhoanna. Welcome to the Best Book Ever podcast.
Hi, Julie. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you here. You know, I have not had the joy of visiting your bookstore yet. I feel like I know it because I follow you on the social medias. Will you tell my listeners about your bookstore?
Absolutely. So we are it's always funny to me how to describe the bookstore because it started as a pop-up. I was working full time and I got this idea to see if I could open a bookstore or start a bookstore business. And I started just doing pop-up events and having monthly book clubs at wine bars around town here in Long Beach. And did that for basically a year and a half.
And can I ask what prompted the urge for a pop-up? Was there a niche of bookstores missing in Long Beach, or what gave you that idea?
Yeah, so it was two things. There definitely is a dearth of bookstores in Long Beach. I grew up in Orange County, not too far from here, but never went to Long Beach when I was a kid or growing up. And it wasn't until I went to grad school at Cal State Long Beach that I became aware of what a fantastic city this was. And this was in 2002 to 2004. There were still a number of bookstores in the area at that time, including this giant bookstore that was downtown, which my brain is escaping me the name of right now. Acres of Books. And it was literally like a giant old warehouse building that was
I remember it.
Yeah, amazing. And there were a couple other bookstores in different parts of town. There was a children's bookstore, a couple of new and used bookstores. But in the intervening time, a lot of those stores have gone away. Acres of Books was completely, closed down and they destroyed the building. The only thing left is, I think, like the front retaining wall, which I think is a huge shame. And a lot of the smaller bookstores that were in different commercial districts in Long Beach have faded away. There's still a few bookstores in the neighborhood, one of which is owned by a friend, Chris, who owns Page Against the Machine. That's actually just up the street from our store. But there wasn't a
great name.
I mean, I'm like, that's a genius name. And his marketing is brilliant. Like, just look at his Instagram account if you want to be entertained. But there wasn't anything like the bookstores I remember when I was in college. I went to college up in Northern California, and San Francisco Bay Area is a hotbed for independent bookstores and bookstore cafes and feminist bookstores and bookstores owned by people of color. I mean, just you name it, they have it up there. But we didn't have that here. And I had worked in the hospitality industry for, about 15 years. And really enjoyed it and had gotten, very advanced in my career. But I just started to think, like, is this it? Is this going to be what I'm known for? Is this going to be my legacy? She was a very good hospitality professional. And I'm sure that a lot of us started to, rethink about our priorities in the lead up and the aftermath of the 2016 election. I think that was a really big wake up call to, to myself, to a lot of friends that I have, about where this country is going and what our role is in helping it go one way or another. And in the meantime, I had gone to Cal State Long Beach to attend their MFA program, and I have a background in creative writing. And I had been going to writing conferences this whole time. And right after the election, I was able to go to a writing conference that was being held in DC, right after Trump was inaugurated. And as you can imagine, there were protests, there were, it was just that was just a buzz in the air constantly. And I was able to attend a talk with Ann Patchett, who's a writer I love, and whose book Bel Canto gives the name to our bookstore. And she's also a bookstore owner. And she was in conversation with Emma Straub, who's also a novelist and a bookstore owner. And that conversation just, was amazing to me. The thing that Anne talked about that really struck me was, she first was approached by somebody else saying, "Hey, we want to bring in a bookstore back to our community in Nashville," because they had lost one of their big indies, and she initially didn't want to do it because she's a writer, she has a solitary life, she I'm sure has already too many demands on her time. And she was saying how she just thought like, oh, I don't know if that would be suited to my, my personality, like to be with people and have to be out there. But she said that because of the election and how their bookstore became a place that people could come to and have, thoughtful conversations, ask interesting questions, engage with people they didn't know, but could still be in this community that respected one another, even if they didn't believe the same things. And she talked about how having the store really, basically restored her faith in humanity. And I just thought that was amazing. And at the end of the Q&A, somebody asked in the audience, if we could do one thing to help, change the world, what could we do? And Anne said, and she was obviously joking, but I took it as kind of, God speaking to me. She said, if you can, you should open a bookstore. And I was like,
okay, then.
Okay. I mean, because I'm sure that you, Julie, I think every book nerd I've ever talked to has dreamed about, having your own bookstore.
That is literally, my questions are printed up here. That is literally one of my questions. Yeah. Every book nerd dreams of this.
Exactly. I mean, we've watched You've Got Mail 10,000 times. We've been to the library and are like, ooh, if I read this, I would do this and that. And so I just started to think about it. Like, what would that be like? And so I did a lot of research. I connected with this great company called Paz & Associates, and they actually offer bookstore consulting. And they host, I think twice a year, they host a week-long, this is pre-pandemic, a week-long in-person bookstore boot camp where you would learn, all the basics of what it takes to run a bookstore. Because it's like any business. And I've never run a business on my own. I've always worked for other people. So that was very eye-opening to see like nuts to bolts, all of the things that you have to think of. And it is a lot. And it certainly can be overwhelming at times. But instead of being daunted at that boot camp, I was invigorated. I mean, here were 20 other people, and I was like, there's 20 people who want to open bookstores and pay to go to this workshop? Like, that's weird. But after that workshop and meeting those people, and whom, a lot of them I now consider friends and have opened bookstores across the country, I was like, we can do this. I could do this. And so I came home and started to think about what can I do, in a small way, because I don't have $100,000 or $200,000 or whatever it takes to open, a bookstore as you think of it, with four walls and freestanding store. And I started to think about what could I do, in a small way without a lot of investment, to just test out this idea. I just said, okay, what's the thing I'm really good at? I feel like I'm really good at recommending books to people. And so I thought, okay, people love book clubs, but I think the two biggest complaints that I hear about them is that, somebody else picked a book that you don't like, or you really like the book, but only two of the people actually read it. So both ways don't really help you to have a good conversation about the book. And so I thought, okay, well, what about if we just get rid of the whole format of having to read one book at that particular time? And what if we focus on, I think, what people for sure enjoy about book club, which is the community and having good conversations with people and learning about books. And so that's what I decided to do with my book club. So pre-pandemic, our book club was you paid to come, and what you would get with it, you'd fill out a little survey that told me what kind of books you liked. And so each person who came got a book particularly picked out for them. And so that was like the surprise that you got at the meeting, was figuring out what kind of book you got. And then we would meet at a wine bar. So we would have, wine and cheese, and then we'd hang out for an hour and, talk about which book everybody else got and why I picked out those books, and then just whatever we were thinking about in general anyways. I begged my family and friends to sign up, and asked, work people, everyone I could think of, like, would you be remotely interested? And they were like, yeah, sure, I'll try it out. And so that was a great joy for me to get people's responses. And that was super fun. Is, you think one way about a person. It's like that, judging your book by its cover, you think like, this person must like XYZ. And then they fill out their reading survey. And I'm like, I never would have guessed that. That's really weird. And then I would pick out books based on that. And so it was super fun to see how people responded. Like, oh my God, I've been wanting to read this, or I've never heard of this, or that. And then we talk about the books that I picked out for everybody. And other people would say like, oh, that sounds really cool. I would like to read that too. And then when you add, good food and drinks to the occasion, I feel like it just makes for a fun time. Yeah. So that's how we started. So I did that for, like I said, a year and a half while I was still working. As we were building up, I started to add on what you think of now as like a, pop-up events, in terms of I'd schlep out, a table of books to a local street fair, or another business in the area that would be kind enough to let me put a table in front of their business. We got into the farmer's market. And so eventually it got to the point where I was doing more events. And then I thought, okay, if this thing is going to really become a thing, I would need to quit my job. I'd need to focus on it and make sure this is a possible thing. And so in May of 2019, I quit my job. Seeing this side of the business, it is a very tough business. The margins are incredibly low. Mm-hmm. It is a lot of work, and it is a lot of physical work because books are heavy. But I think that every single person I've talked to in the book selling industry has also been so kind and so generous with their advice. And every single one of them has said, like, this is a passion. This is not something you're going to do to make it rich, but this is something that you do for yourself and for your community, and, in love and appreciation of all the books that you've loved as a child and as an adult.
So you landed on the name Bel Canto Books because the spark of the idea came from that lecture by Ann Patchett. Mm-hmm. And does she know?
So I've never talked to her. I mean, her bookstore is called Parnassus Books, and I've had some lovely social media conversations with whoever runs their social media account. And Ann's co-owner, Karen, has reached out to me and been super, super kind. So I think that she must know something at some point. I'm perfectly happy to, be in this state of worshiping from afar.
As we all are.
Exactly. Yeah, I can't say enough about Ann Patchett's writing. That book also, she has a nonfiction kind of a memoir called Truth and Beauty. I don't know if you've read that.
Yes.
That is spectacular. And, as somebody who considers herself also a writer, that book was also very eye-opening and important to me as I was, kind of starting out as a poet and figuring out, like, what am I doing?
Have you always been a bookworm?
I think I have always been a bookworm. And when I was a kid, on summer vacations, that was my favorite thing to do, is to have a giant stack of books next to me in bed. And when I would wake up, I would literally just roll over, pick up a book and start reading. It's just, I don't think there's anything quite like reading a book, because it's so immersive. You're in your brain, it's just words on a page. Nothing happens until you start to read it. And yet this, what half a pound, 5x8 object can take you to places that you've never dreamed of, that can help you process things that have happened in your own life by reading, somebody else who went through something similar. And it's certainly, I think in the pandemic, books became important to people again, because they realized that in a time when you are struggling with so much, you're at home alone maybe, or you're separated from your family, you're not working. And there's just so much terribleness, in the news, in life, that people reconnected with books as a way to comfort themselves, and as a way to travel when you couldn't travel. And so that has always been, what I have most loved.
How do you decide what to put in your bookstore? Do you focus on something specific? Tell me about that.
So I learned so many great lessons from operating as a pop-up business. And one of the things I did when I was doing pop-ups around town is that, as a way of organizing myself and of being able to narrow the 12 bazillion books to a more manageable number, is that each month I would pick a theme. And I, in general, follow the American Library Association's month-long celebrations of things. So this month is Asian American Pacific Islander Month. And so the books that are featured in the store are books by and about AAPI people. And that really helps in terms of narrowing what I'm going to buy for each month. I also have a focus on books by women and people of color, which is not to say that we don't carry books by, white guys. We do. But I look out for books by women and people of color. And number one, outside of all of that, the book has to be a great story. It has to, it has to be captivating and interesting. It's my bookstore, so it has to be something that I could see myself reading. And those are basically my criteria for everything. So it's people come in, they're like, God, you have so many subjects and so many different types of things. Yeah, because that's what I'm interested in. In terms of the children's book section, it has been incredibly satisfying to pick out books that are by writers of color, because I didn't see books like that when I was a kid.
So was it through your bookstore that you came across this book that we're talking about today, The Body Papers?
Yes. So when I first came across this book, I had not opened the bookstore yet. We were still doing pop-ups. And I have family in the Boston area. And so I guess it was 2 years ago already. My gosh. We were able to go out in July for a month-long holiday, and stayed with my in-laws. And while I was there, I was, doing bookstore research. So I was going to various bookstores around town, and Boston.
Oh my God, that sounds like a fun thing to do.
Amazing. And a good friend who was in that bookstore boot camp with me, Paul Swiden, has since opened his bookstore, which is called the Silver Unicorn. And they're outside of, in Western Massachusetts, a few hours outside of Boston.
I'll link to it in the show notes also.
Great.
Yeah.
And he was, I asked him, can I just come and, first of all, be in your bookstore and geek out? But can I come and shadow you for a few days, just to see how, a physical bookstore operation works? And he's like, yeah, of course. And then he also was doing this event, which I was like, this is genius. Why don't I see this everywhere? And so he had partnered with a catering company in his town, and they were doing an author's dinner. And which I'm like, okay, cool. Dinner with authors. I've seen that before. But what was the twist was that it was 3 different authors, 3 different types of books, and each book inspired a dish. That's
Oh my
that's the
God.
sound I was waiting for. Like
That
any
is
book nerd is
such
like,
a good
what?
idea.
Yeah. So he had these three authors, and I was like, that sounds genius because I'm just also going to get a great dinner.
Right.
Sign me up. And so I dragged a friend of mine out there, and Grace was one of the authors, and I had not heard of the book before, and it's a memoir, and she was just like such a fantastic presence at that dinner. The other special thing was that with each course, the authors rotated around, so you actually got to sit with them and
Oh my
talk for a few
gosh.
minutes. Yeah, I mean, it was just phenomenal. It's definitely one of my favorite nights, of all time. Um, and then I got to actually read the book, and I was like, "What? Wow, wow!"
Okay. First of all, I have to know what dish was served with hers.
They made lumpia, which is Filipino egg rolls, and that was the appetizer. And
Oh,
then they
yeah.
closed out the evening with a dessert that also incorporated like coconut and those kind of flavors in the dessert.
Why don't you tell my listeners what this book is about? How do you describe it when you are selling it, for example?
Well, I say that it is a book that means so much to me. It's a story of a family. It's a story of an immigrant family. It is a story of abuse and trauma. But I think that she talks about those things in such it's like her language is so simple and so honest. But it's not sensational. I don't think she dwells on things and tries to make, the things that happen to her are horrific enough in and of themselves. Um, and I think that I don't know how you do this, but I think she found a way to write about what happened to her. And she was abused by her grandfather for many years. It wasn't just one time or a couple of times. But through her craft, she finds a way to write about it that is, honestly beautiful. And I think that the thread that runs through this book is that, her belief that storytelling and being honest about our stories and sharing our stories with others is a powerful and healing force. And that we are doing a disservice to ourselves and to our family, to our community, by hiding or pretending that bad things happen.
I never thought of it like that before, of what the disservice that we do by only sharing the happy stories.
Hmm. Absolutely. And I think, tying it back to the pandemic, I think with the protests of last June and, with the rise of anti-Asian violence and, us another reckoning with race in this country, I think a lot of us, a lot of our families are having conversations that we never had before. Especially for immigrant families, the tendency, I think, is to focus on the positive, because otherwise, you left your families, you left your culture, you left your homeland for what? To come here and be, treated as not equal to other people. So I think that there is this I think very natural desire to want to focus on the good, to you know to project an outward image that we're fine, that we're doing well.
Mm.
But I think that, that's not all the honest truth. And I think that we're realizing that until we can actually understand and claim all of ourselves, and that means the bad and the good, we can't honestly move forward in a way that, that is positive or that's healing. And I feel like this book is like, I feel so seen by this book. Like, I didn't experience the same traumas that Grace did, but I think all of us can relate to, moments when we felt different from other people, when we felt misunderstood, when we felt, persecuted for whatever reason. And I think this book just really resonates in so many ways with that. And especially as a woman, like the parts that I am, to me are the most heartbreaking are seeing her, young girlhood self who is smart and athletic and confident, and then what happens to her and the break that causes in her life. And then to me, the inspiring thing is knowing that through this book, she's been able to come, she is not fully healed. She's not, that doesn't make all those things go away, but she's found a way to deal with what's happened to her and create some amazing work that is now helping other people connect with themselves and be able to tell their own stories. Like, that to me is like a superpower.
I was really struck by her use and her concept of the idea of the body.
Mm-hmm.
But you really do get a sense in reading it of the author as what's that word? Corporeal?
Uh-huh. Yep.
As a physical being.
Yep. And I think that's also spread throughout the book in terms of, just even in the opening pages where she talks about, coming to the Philippines for the first time to actually live there as an adult, having grown up here in the US, and how she physically is in danger all the time because cars are trying to run her over.
Yes.
And also just being seen and, going back to a place that should feel like home and does in some ways, but also doesn't in some ways, because people see you and can tell just by looking at you, just by looking at your body and how you stand and how you carry yourself, that you're not really the same as them. And so I just feel that again and again. It's like these themes are woven throughout the story.
And she really talks about how we carry trauma. I found that so deeply moving and painful to read.
Absolutely. And it gave me tremendous empathy for, people who I know in my personal life who are dealing with terrible things. Because I think it's easy for those of us who maybe have not faced incredible trauma or severe bouts of depression or anxiety to dismiss it or to discount it or say like, oh, it can't be that bad. Like you should, and I think that's also part of like my Filipino culture. And I think Grace talks about it in that, we're taught not to wallow in your feelings, because that's seen as selfish in some ways, and that you're being soft, and life is hard and you have to just get on with it and focus on being positive. And my mom would say, like, just go for a walk. Like, I don't know why people are sitting around at home so depressed. They just need to go for a walk. But it's not as simple as that. And I think those chapters where she talks about after college and really just, you're with her when she's sleeping a lot and having these nightmares and feeling, incapable of doing anything. It really brings it to home what a pervasive and, all-encompassing feeling this creates in yourself if you are, trying to come to terms with some terrible, episode in your life.
Yeah, she even addresses that, doesn't she? Where I can't remember who she was talking to. Was it her father, where she was talking about it? And he said the same thing had happened to him. A neighbor had enticed him into his house. Was that her dad?
Yep, that was her dad.
And for candy. And then she said, and then what happened? And he said, yeah, it happened. And I got the candy. And then she kind of asked the next question, and then what? And he said, nothing. That's it. It happened. Yeah. Push it away.
Yeah. No, what's funny is I gave this book to my parents and my mom, because I've been passing Filipino American books to them as I'm becoming more aware of them. And that's been a great gift, is to have these conversations, with your parents that prompt, to be able to ask questions that probably you couldn't ask before or you didn't feel comfortable asking. And so I asked my mom, I was like, so, because, in the book, it's like, once it's found out, it's not actually even a secret. People are not that surprised, which is just horrifying. And I asked my mom about that, and she said, yeah, that happened. Like, we knew, like, as kids, they knew that there were certain people, certain men that they stayed away from. And if the guys were drinking, like, not to go over there. And I was like, what? And I was like, how old were you? She's like, I was a kid, like 10, 11. Like, just don't go down those stairs at night by yourself because the guys are down there drinking and you don't know what. I'm like, okay, that's great.
Good to know.
Yeah. I'm like, okay, then. Very well. Yeah.
Do your parents like the same books that you do when you pass on things from your bookstore?
Not always. It's really interesting to see what they enjoy and what they don't. Some books that they really like, and I'm like, oh, cool. That's a nice thing that we can share with each other. Other books, my parents are like, that didn't do anything for me. I'm like, okay.
I don't know anything about Philippine literature. What else are you passing? What sort of things do you pass to your parents?
So there is a huge amount of Filipino American, and I focus on Filipino American because that's, we're here in America and there are so many great writers coming out now. And I think that's also the huge gift that Meeting Grace has helped me. She's helped me to connect with so many authors, and she welcomed me and introduced me to her friend Bren Bataclan, who runs the Boston Filipino American Book Club. They've been meeting.
Gosh.
Yeah, they've been meeting in the Boston area for 15 years.
Wow.
That's mind blowing to me.
So cool.
But their book club is specifically for writers who are Filipino American. And so I've just been working my way through their book list.
So who should we be looking out for in addition to Grace, who I will follow forever? But tell me some other authors, Filipino American authors that you're really enjoying.
So in terms of adults, some of the books that I've read and really loved are, there's a writer, and I think she's New York based, Elaine Castillo, has a book called America is Not the Heart. That is a beautiful novel. It's set in like 1990s-esque, I think, in the Bay Area. And it follows a family that in the Philippines is, part of the upper class. The husband is a doctor and he marries basically one of his nurses, and she's of the lower class, and their family looks down on her. But then when they come to the U.S., their roles are reversed. And she becomes kind of the breadwinner of the family, and I think this is very typical of Filipino families that the women acclimate better, and I think that's also similar in some other immigrant communities. And the men have a struggle with fitting themselves into this new society, and
Really?
It follows their families and what happens here in the U.S. And then the husband, one of his nieces, comes from the Philippines, basically fleeing from her life because she was part of the resistance to the Marcos, dictatorship, and has to come to America. And so you also see things from her perspective, and then the couple's young daughter, you see things from her point of view as well. And I love that book because I learned a lot of things in the book where she focuses on the niece who was a revolutionary, about that movement against Marcos, which I didn't know anything about because my parents had moved here by then. And, again, we didn't talk about bad things. So I didn't know anything about that. And I really love that book for shining a light on that moment. And then, it helped me to be able to ask my parents, like, so what was it like when you were in the Philippines? Do you know, did this happen to any of our family members back there? Do you know anything like this? So that has been a great book to stir some conversations. Another great book that I have really loved, and this is by a local author, is a graphic novel called In Waves. And he's Filipino American. I can't remember. I can't remember if he was born here or born in the Philippines. But he's a young writer, and the book is an homage to his first love, who he met in high school and unfortunately passed away of cancer. And he interweaves their love story with this history of surfing, which sounds like two weird things to put together, but you find out, as the novel or as the graphic novel progresses, why these two things are related. And it's just beautifully illustrated.
What is a way for my listeners to support your bookstore if they are not Long Beach locals or Southern California locals?
Yeah, there's lots of ways to support us. We have our physical inventory at the bookstore is also on our website, shopthehangout.com, which is the Shop Collective's website, so they can see what books we physically have on the shelves there. We also have a partnership with an organization called bookshop.org. And they were instrumental to keeping a lot of indie bookstores in business during the pandemic, because lots of places had very strict, closures, and some places still aren't open at all for in-store shopping. And all the purchases that you make on Bookshop will benefit the bookstore if you're choosing. So you can set, if you're in, upstate New York, you can pick a local bookstore to have your monies go towards. So every purchase there contributes back to us. And then we also have a partnership with Libro FM. And by the way, there is a great audiobook of The Body Papers, which is read by Grace Talusan. And it's phenomenal. And so same thing there with Libro FM. You can choose a bookstore to support, and whatever you purchase will get a percentage of.
What are you reading right now?
So we have 4 book clubs at the store. One is called our Book of the Month Club, and that follows whatever the theme of the month is. We have one for AAPI writers. We have a graphic novel book club. And then the last one is a book club that I actually co-host with a friend here in Long Beach that's called the Burning Issues Book Club. And that is a nonfiction book club that specifically focuses on environmental issues, social justice, and, weighty topics. So the book that I'm reading now for that is called Bullshit Jobs by David Graeber. And it is his take on questioning, the kind of jobs that we have. And specifically, they're typically more white collar. I think like extraneous jobs that seem like you're just pushing paper around. And the proliferation of those kinds of jobs since, probably the 1950s. I keep hearing this, I can't remember who this is attributed to, but there was this belief that once, automation happened and that we became more efficient, that all of a sudden we would have all this leisure time, that Americans would be able to enjoy life because we would have machines to help us and be more efficient. And instead what's happened is that we've actually used those machines and that efficiency to create more stuff. That people, do we really need all that stuff?
Well, I want to thank you for joining me today. I knew this was going to be a wonderful conversation, and I cannot wait to visit you in person. It's on my planner, my little bookstore trip.
Thank you so much, Julie. This has been such a pleasure.
Thanks for listening, bookworms. For more information on this episode and links to all the books we discussed, go to our website, bestbookeverpodcast.com. You can also follow the podcast on Instagram at bestbookeverpodcast. I'm your host, Julie Strauss, and you can find me everywhere as Julie Wrote a Book. If you loved this episode as much as I loved making it, why not leave a review wherever you're listening? Each review helps new listeners find my work, and I'm so grateful for your help. Thanks for joining me today, and I will see you at the library.
Places where there are books are magical places to me.